Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at the most common Russian sniper rifle of World War II. Soviet sniper rifle, I should say. This is the model 9130 PU, and PU refers to the scope specifically right here. Now, this is the most heavily produced Soviet sniper rifle of the war, but it's actually not the first one. It's not the only one. It's actually the fourth. So let's go back. Let's do a quick recap of Soviet Mosin Nagant development. So the Soviet Union takes over from the Tsars of Russia at the end of World War I. Well, the end for Russia, anyway. 1917, they inherit the model 1891 long Mosin Nagant. The Soviets in the 1920s will start a whole series of armament refurbishment replacement programs, and they decide to modernize the Mosin. And what they come up with is the M9130, which is this basic pattern of rifle. You'll notice it has the 9130 style rear sight on it. And at the same time that they're doing that, they also develop a sniper version. It uses a scope called the PE. It's a 4-power German post reticle, pretty normal traditional style of scope. They actually get a fair amount of German engineering assistance in manufacturing it, designing it, and that's adopted basically at the same time as the model 9130. It's the pattern of 1931 sniper. And that, by the way, has a mount right here on the top of the receiver. Scope sits right there. They will do some work with this. They send these to the Spanish Civil War. They decide, well, we need to make some improvements. So they redesign the scope a bit, and they come up with the PEM, and they also redesign the mount, which becomes a side rail mount, again, inspired quite a lot by the German designs. That's adopted in 36, goes into production in 37. That is actually the model of sniper rifle that was officially standard in Russian service when World War II begins. However, this is Russia, and they're trying to come onto an advanced technological footing equal with the other major powers of the world. So they've been working on developing a semi-automatic infantry rifle for 10 or 20 years at this point. And by the time the war breaks out, and this, by the way, is the beginning of the war where Russia and Germany are allied. They both invade Poland, split it up. The Soviet Union invades the Baltic states. At that point, the Soviets are developing the SVT-40, and they actually decide to use it as their sniper rifle. So there's a sniper model of the SVT-40, and it has this short little scope. They designed this scope specifically for the SVT-40 because those original long scopes on the Mosins were too long. They'd cover the ejection port of the SVT, and that caused some potential reliability problems with cases bouncing back into the action. Not a problem on the Mosins because they're manually operated. Now, the problem they have is the SVT-40 turns out to not be an effective sniper rifle for them. Those guns go into production finally in March of 1941, and just over a year later, in August of 42, they're deemed officially basically unserviceable. They have accuracy problems. The barrels will heat and shift point of impact fairly quickly. The first round cold bore shot doesn't go where the rest of the rounds go. It's a serious problem. Their attempt, they've shut down Mosin Nagant sniper rifle production back in the summer of 1940 in anticipation of having cool new semi-automatic sniper rifles. And then not only does their sniper rifle turn out to kind of, oops, it actually sucks, but also by this point, Germany has betrayed Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. So now they really need a lot of sniper rifles. It's worth pointing out here that the Soviet Union employed snipers on a greater scale, like an order of magnitude greater than any other army in World War II. Just to give you a little bit of a spoiler, by the end of the war, they will have manufactured 388,000 of this specific pattern, the 9130 PU. Not counting the SVTs, semi-autos, not counting the earlier PEs and PEMs. 388,000 of these as sniper rifles. In contrast, the United States manufactures a little over 28,000 Remington 1903 A4 sniper rifles. So the Soviet Union, yeah, they're a bigger army than the US has, but they're not that much bigger, and they have well more than 10 times as many sniper rifles just of this pattern. So the sniper is an integral part of Russian military doctrine and planning at this point. And they need a ton of sniper rifles. So what the heck are they going to do now? Well, the solution is take the scope that they had adopted for the SVT semi-auto. It's not only does it fit the SVT well, but it's also simple, cost-effective, and quick to manufacture. That was part of what they needed from it. Take that scope and adapt a way to put it on Mosin Nagants, and then real quick spin up tooling of 9130 snipers again. So that becomes the plan. A design engineer at Izhevsk by the name of Kochetov comes up with this mounting system, which you'll see in just a moment, in June of 1942. They do final testing on it in August of 1942, deem it good to go, better than the SVTs, is way cheaper, way simpler, easier to install than the earlier top and side rail mounts for the PEs and PEMs, and that becomes adopted as the 9130 PU sniper rifle. So let's take a closer look at it. In order to turn a 9130 Mosin into a sniper rifle, there's only two things that you have to do with it. One is you have to put on a scope base and put a scope on it. The other is you have to make the bolt handle bent and a little bit longer. And the whole purpose of that is so that the bolt handle will clear the scope. If we try to take a regular 9130 bolt, you see the problem right there. Since I know someone is going to ask, let me point out the standard Mosin Nagant stripper clip does not work. The Russian solution to this is, "Da, comrade, you take bullet off clip and put into rifle." So these did not work with stripper clips. One of the goals in designing a scope mount for the 9130 PU is to come up with a system that didn't require a lot of really precise machining. The earlier, especially the PEM bases, had been very precisely manufactured. They had to be to make sure that the scope would mount close enough to actually make zero. So what Kochetov came up with is a mount here that has really significant gross elevation adjustments built into the scope base. So there's a screw there and a matching screw on the bottom, and you thread those in and out, and you can dramatically shift the angle of this scope. Now, holding the scope in is just one big screw right here. So if I unscrew that, I can just lift the scope and base out of the mount. You can see on the front here, we have a round socket. That matches up with this permanent ball machined into the front of the base. So this will always self-center, and then you tighten it down with this screw, and you adjust your gross elevation with these two. Now we have a couple of pins that you can't see because they're blind pins underneath, mounting this base in place, and then there are two threaded holes, one there, one there. So those threaded holes are these two big screws. You then have two locking screws, preventing the main screws from coming loose. And that's your mount. Cut a little notch in the stock, and you're good to go. Worth pointing out that both Izhevsk and Tula would make their own scope bases, although they did not make scopes. Initially, there was one factory making the scopes. That was factory number 357 in Omsk. Early in the spring of 1943, a couple additional factories would come online making the scopes. But all the bases were made by the main rifle factories. This is an Izhevsk rifle, you'll see that in a moment, and this is an Izhevsk base. That is distinctive by the fact that these scalloped weight-reducing cuts have like a 1/4 inch of space up here at the top. On the Tula ones, they go almost all the way up to the top. And if we want to get really nerdy here, we have a very large milling tool, milling cutter that was used at Izhevsk. So you can see the circles here are quite large. At Tula, they used a cutter that was about this big. So you'll see several lines of circular milling marks on the inside of those mounts. Tula also numbered its scope bases to the rifles. Izhevsk did not. Izhevsk would take the scope serial number and write it on the side of the barrel of the rifle, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Now, adapting these scopes from the original SVT scope was a pretty simple thing. Really, all they did was change the BDC cam in them to match the barrel length of the 9130 instead of the SVT. So the ballistic trajectory of, the BDC cam had to be slightly different because the initial velocity was slightly different because the barrel length was different. So we have a BDC there that runs out, in theory, all the way to 1,300 meters. That's pretty optimistic, but, I guess what the heck. Not uncommon, certainly, at that time. This is only a 3.5 power scope, so yeah. You do also have windage adjustment here, and you can see our windage is set almost right at 0, which is nice. Henry Chan over at 9 Hole was kind enough to get this zeroed in for us. Lastly, before we go back to the rifle, I'll point out this factory mark indicates that this scope was manufactured by factory number 296 in Yoshkar-Ola. We have a serial number here. They didn't make like that many scopes. The first 2 digits are the production date. So it's a 1943 scope, the 22,000th scope manufactured. So almost as many, by the time they'd made this scope, they made almost as many just scopes as the US had O3A4 snipers in total. All right, now let's take a look at the rifle markings. We have right here the arrow in a triangle of the Izhevsk factory. We have 1943 production date. We have our serial number here, and you can actually check on serial number prefixes that were known sniper rifles. So that's one way to authenticate that a rifle is an original sniper. And that right there, that 2-letter Cyrillic prefix is one of the prefixes that was specifically used for snipers. For what it's worth, Izhevsk used 2 letters and 4 digits. Tula used 2 letters and 3 digits. Both Izhevsk and Tula had a separate production line for precision barrels that would be used in sniper rifles. Quickly worth pointing out that some of those precision barrels were overrun and got put on regular rifles, but you won't find it the other way around. All the sniper rifles had precision barrels, and the 2 different factories marked those precision barrels different ways. Izhevsk stamped them with a C in a circle, which is really poorly stamped on this rifle, but it's up there. You'll typically find it here or sometimes over on this side. That one's kind of hard to find. Like I said, it's often badly stamped, and this rifle's been refurbished, so it's been refinished, and that made that stamp even worse. On the Tula production guns, you will see a Cyrillic CN or CH up here, stamped on top of the barrel. So the Tula ones are a little easier to recognize, a little more distinctive. The standard, by the way, for sniper rifle accuracy was that they had to put, at 100 meters, they had to put 4 shots into either an 8 or a 9 centimeter group. That standard changed at some point during the war, and I don't know exactly when, but that equates to approximately 3 minutes of angle. So that's the accuracy that was expected from these rifles. Also, when sniper rifle production began for the PU, the Red Army insisted that it wanted the sniper rifles to be built to pre-war standards of fit, finish, and quality. And it took Izhevsk in particular a little time to try and get up to that standard, because at this point in the war, they were putting out some pretty crude, crank it out of the factory sort of production. But the sniper rifles were intended to be pre-war standard. I don't think they ever quite made it to that, but they were more nicely finished than regular rifles. Now, Izhevsk matched scopes to rifles by taking the scope serial number and stamping it on the left side of the barrel shank of the rifle. Now, you remember our scope was a 43 something 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 serial number. This is A10 8, etc. The reason for that is this is a Polish refurbished rifle, and when the Poles refurbished it, they put a different scope on it, and they didn't bother to change the marks. Had this been a Russian refurbished rifle with a different scope on it, they would have actually lined out this number and put the new scope number in here, and you will sometimes find scopes that are rifles that have had that done. Tula did not do this. Tula instead put the rifle serial number on the base right down in here. And then there were some other standards that were done for refurbishment after the war that are a bit more detailed than we're going to get into in this video. But original World War II production Tula will be marked here. Izhevsk will be marked with the scope serial number here. A couple other little interesting points. The triggers on the sniper rifles were actually deliberately made lighter and crisper than on the standard infantry models, and this one has a pretty decent trigger on it. And the front sights were actually subtly different. It's the exact same pattern of front sight, but infantry rifles were in fact zeroed with bayonets mounted, and that tended to have them hold lower. The snipers were zeroed without bayonets because you don't really want to have the bayonet on that thing if you're trying to use it as a sniper rifle. And so they actually required taller front sight posts as a result. So it's not like a sniper spec front sight, but it is taller so that it could zero properly without a bayonet on the rifle. So the reticle in the scope is a basic German post right there, And as you adjust the elevation, which I can't really do while I'm holding the camera, the reticle will move up and down and side to side. So the reticle moves visibly within the scope there. Now, and the scope is mounted high enough that you can actually pretty easily use the iron sights below it, should you want to. There we go. There's our rear iron sight in focus. All right, so I spoiled this a little bit telling you there were 388,000 of them made. Production actually ended at the end of 1944, with the exception of a couple thousand stragglers that entered service in 45, and a small batch of just over 1,200 that were actually made in 1947. It's not clear to me exactly why they needed to make a new batch, but they did make a small new batch. By the end of 44, they had so many of these rifles that they just didn't need more of them, and they could allocate that industrial production to other things that they did need more of or that were higher priority. By that point, of course, they've got enough to equip the army, they've got enough in reserve to cover expected losses and spoilage, and it's early 1945. The Red Army is well on its way to Berlin. They're clearly winning. There's only one end in sight for the war. So both arsenals, Tula and Izhevsk, or both factories, will spool down their production. At the end of the war, this remains the best Soviet sniper rifle in service and in inventory, and so it remains the standard official sniper rifle for the Red Army after World War II. They will go ahead and, of course, refurbish all the equipment that the Army has. Everyone does this at the end of the war. And they really have a lot more sniper rifles than they need for the standing army that will remain in service after the end of the war. Obviously, everyone, especially the Russians, are demobilizing large numbers of troops once the war is over. So as they're assessing and refurbishing rifles, 9130 PUs that come in that don't meet the accuracy requirements for a sniper, which could be there could be a number of explanations. Maybe the bore's a little shot out, maybe the crown's damaged, maybe there's something wrong with the scope. Could be a bunch of different things. Those guns, if they meet the standard for a standard infantry rifle, then the scopes and bases are removed and they're essentially decommissioned down into regular 9130 infantry rifles, and they go into storage in that configuration. They then come out of storage in that configuration a few decades later when they are sold as surplus in the United States and elsewhere. So those guns are commonly called X-snipers in collector parlance, and they're distinguishable by having welded up scope mounting holes. And you'll find X-sniper versions of all three Soviet sniper patterns, the PEs, the PEMs, and these PUs. Now, plenty of these remained in service that did meet sniper specifications. They weren't actually replaced as the standard Red Army sniper rifle until the 1960s with the development of the SVD Dragunov. At this same time, it's worth pointing out there is one country that will go ahead and manufacture its own 9130 PUs. That's Hungary. They make them from 1952 to 1954. Hungarian one is a subject of its own separate video. And then there are a couple of countries that will adopt and use the 9130 PU, Yugoslavia and Poland in particular. And both of those countries did also do their own refurbishing. What we have here is a Polish refurbished 9130 PU. It's a gorgeous gun because it clearly got rebuilt, went into storage, and was never issued again until eventually being sold as surplus. So absolutely magnificent condition stock. It's a really cool example because it is a totally authentic original Izhevsk PU sniper rifle that went through all of World War II and then got refurbished by the Poles after the war. So we see all the original markings plus a few characteristics of Polish refurbishment, like the brand new stock that's on it. Makes a gorgeous piece. So these are out there. It's worth pointing out there are a lot of fakes of Russian sniper rifles. I mentioned those X-snipers. Those are sometimes recommissioned into sniper rifles using either original or reproduction mounts and scopes. Especially with the PU, all of these parts were designed to be efficient and cheap and easy to manufacture, and they were often made fairly crudely. And well, that's a recipe for making fakes that are hard to distinguish from the originals. So if you're looking for an original, caveat emptor, do your research, understand exactly what it is you're looking at, because there's a lot of them out there that came in as either were turned into fakes or came in as reproduction sniper rifles, you name it. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this look at a sniper rifle that was very effective and very important during the Second World War. Thanks for watching.